When white people bring up black on black crime as a gotcha to shut down conversations about police brutality, I have one thought. Do they even know black people? Have they spent even a second, a minute, a moment in a black community? Why? Because of this thing. This is the August 1979 issue of Ebony magazine, dedicated entirely to black on black crime. Contrary to popular belief, this conversation isn't new. It's been a fixture inside of black communities for decades. And as this issue shows, the dominant, almost unanimous answer to the question of black on black crime has often been the police. More on that in a minute. There is a paradox here. Black people on the one hand hate the police, and on the other, kind of love the police. At least that's what the voting record shows. In one instance, we've been decrying police violence since forever, from Frederick Douglass to Langston Hughes, from Marvin Gaye's ballads to Kendrick Lamar's bars. Last decade, Black Lives Matter has amplified that record, from Trayvon Martin to Breonna Taylor and too many others in between. Calls to defund the police and end qualified immunity have turned these relatively obscure notions into rallying cries. But that's only half the story.
It is a myth to say that African Americans don't want law enforcement. We do. We want our grandmothers to be able to walk to church and be safe. We want our babies to be able to walk to the park and be safe.
Take this map, for example. This map shows a list of cop city facilities that are popping up nationwide. And in some of the blackest cities, they're being pushed forward by black leaders. In places like Atlanta, DC, New York, and Philly, black mayors have expanded police budgets and power. And make no mistake, often with the support of black voters.
Question that I put out to the city. Hey, I thought Black Lives Matter. The victims were black. Many of the shooters were black.
So the question is why? Why do so many black leaders, politicians, and voters consistently support the tough on crime policies and practices that have proven to be devastating for our communities? To answer this question, I turn to the Pulitzer Prize winning book, Locking Up Our Own by James Forman Jr. If how do we stop crime is a good question, Forman shows how black communities have time and time again come up with bad answers.
So I wanted to show how both of those things could be true. There could be this historic racism that's still manifesting itself today, and there could have been mistakes that were made by some well-meaning African-American leaders.
But I didn't want to just look at the history. I wanted a present-day perspective as well. So I sat down with the mayor of Baltimore, Brandon Scott. Under his leadership, the city has taken intentional, data-driven steps toward crime prevention.
Today, as you and I are talking, Baltimore has the fewest amount of homicides through this date on record.
So in this video, we're digging into it all. A history that spans across decades, touches nearly every segment of society, and I think reveals something about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. This is the rise and fall of black on black policing. Let's dig in. This video is sponsored by Ground News. More on that later. Okay, so this magazine is like a blast from the past. You have Newport menthol ads a page over from detangling hairspray for black kids. Wild stuff, just wild stuff. Or this beauty of a spread that you've got to see. Stop coddling hoodlums, right next to this picture of some kids protesting with a sign that says, "The pushers are lynching our beautiful children daily." There are so many layers here, and it highlights something about the way black people were thinking about crime in their communities at the time, a very specific framing that would shape the way people thought about appropriate responses to crime. Ebony magazine's Black on Black crime issue was split into 3 parts: the causes, the consequences, and the cures. And I want to follow that same format for this video, but instead of only talking about black on black crime, remember, we're also talking about black on black policing. First, the causes. Wanted, brother for crimes against brother. This poster made its debut on the campus of Howard University and HBCU in October of 1972. In a way, there's something simultaneously ominous and revolutionary in this image that perfectly captures the origins of black on black policing. So it's the late 60s, early 70s, the years immediately following the gains of the civil rights movement, and cities with significant black populations, places like, again, Atlanta, DC, Detroit, were all getting their very first black mayors. These historic firsts were huge. People like Maynard Jackson in Atlanta or Carl B. Stokes in Cleveland signaled a sign of the times, that things were moving in the right direction, and the possibility that representation could usher in a new relationship between black communities and their local government. But there was something else going on as well. Crime was rising. Heroin had devastated communities. PCP was spreading. Crack was waiting at the door.
This is crack cocaine.
Just say no.
People were scared, and they expected Black leaders to fix it all. One essay in this edition of Ebony magazine went so far as to argue that the fear of crime even changed the built environment in low-income communities. They point out the fortress-like architecture, smaller windows to deter burglars, and double gates for extra security. If you grew up around the time that I grew up in the 1990s, your grandma probably had burglar bars on the doors and windows of her home. So like, I've seen this with my own two eyes. To make matters worse, Black neighborhoods have always, in a strange way, been chronically over-policed and under-policed. Cops always seem to be around to harass and surveil and brutalize you, but are suspiciously unavailable or uninterested when it's time to find the perpetrator of the crimes committed against you.
Hi, we got a call of a burglary here.
Yeah, that was about an hour ago.
Whoa, we didn't ask you that.
Well, somebody broke into the house. I fired at him with my piece and he ran away.
You know, it's too bad you didn't get him. Be one less nigga out here in the streets we have to worry about.
And all of this was expected to change, and quickly with new Black leadership. Forman outlines many of these changes in the book, specifically how these pain points and urgent expectations shaped Black people's approach to policing and crime policy in DC.
Somebody like Eric Holder comes in as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia in the early 1990s, and he gives a big speech where he says, crime and violence are destroying our communities. He says the Black people of DC are no more free than the Black people of Selma, Alabama were in 1955. But what's keeping us down, what's keeping us locked inside is crime and violence and criminal gangs. So in response to that, he promoted a program called Operation Ceasefire, where police would stop cars on any pretext of a minor traffic violation because they wanted to search those cars for guns.
From religious leaders and parents urging tougher criminalization of marijuana to the misguided belief that cracking down on petty crimes like broken windows and shoplifting would prevent more serious crimes like murder. Many Black folks in DC and across the country had drunk the tough policing Kool-Aid by the gallon.
My story is a tragedy, right? Because it is a story of best intentions in many cases. Part of the story is that people didn't know what was going to happen next. And they said, well, it's not that big of a deal if we don't decriminalize marijuana because nobody's really going to prison. No one's losing their job for a marijuana conviction. But then later in the 80s and in the 90s, we passed laws that said you can't get a student loan, you can't get public housing, you can't get a job if you have a marijuana conviction. So a decision they made at time A later turns out to have these devastating effects.
In some ways, you can kind of expect this genre of conservative reactionism from church folks and overprotective parents, but Black revolutionary groups were not exempt. Even Stokely Carmichael joined the anti-drug fight, saying that fighting against drugs is revolutionary because drugs are a trick of the oppressor. And he's not exactly wrong, but he may be missing the point. And I think that's how you get posters like this one or signs like that one. The aesthetics and politics of pro-Blackness, as Forman outlines, took on a kind of militancy against addicts and drug dealers specifically. To be pro-Black was to be anti-drug, and to be a drug dealer in a Black community was to be anti-Black. And so the argument went that drug dealers were just as bad as the KKK, and drug addicts weren't much better and shouldn't be coddled. You can imagine how this might feel like a coherent, righteous position to take, but it quickly turned dark. Decades before Chris Rock's infamous "Black people" and "Nick" joke, Black students at Howard were writing about addicts in almost exactly those terms when talking about crime reports. Check this one out. It's Wednesday, October 25th, Sister Valencia Abner, a resident of Fraser Hall, was robbed of $10 by a Black man, in parentheses, nigger, holding a silver-plated .38 caliber. It was really anti-Blackness in the name of protecting Blackness. Was it respectability? Was it responsibility? I don't know. Either way, the answer was to get tough. Middle-class Black students, working-class Black parents, Black pastors, Black politicians, almost everybody was willing to lock up our own. Which is why it's infuriating when outsiders weaponize Black on Black crime. Black communities have wrestled with this harder, longer, and more painfully than any other group could ever imagine. You will never hate Black on Black crime more than Black people, and to throw that in Black people's faces is to ignore the history of Black people doing everything, literally everything possible to stop it, including internalizing white supremacist notions about who and what we are, including watching our fathers and brothers and sons be thrown away. We've tried tough on crime. We've tried red dog units. We've been the foot soldiers and the defense attorneys and the prosecutors and judges in every part of the system. And what we, black people, know better than anyone else is that that stuff never worked. It was always insufficient, and it always came up short. The failures of tough on crime laws are well documented. Study after study show if you want less crime, reduce poverty, improve education, invest in communities.
One of the biggest mistakes that we've made in American society is putting the sole responsibility for dealing with violence on the backs of police officers, right? They could never do it alone. And quite frankly, we're putting things on them that they weren't responsible for.
And the results are clear. We got over-policed, underprotected communities and a justice system riddled with bias. Which is why many DC parents reported being on edge as more than 2,000 armed National Guardsmen were deployed to the streets of DC ahead of the start of the new school year. The mayor is on record saying that, quote, parents are anxious. And I think it's in large part because surveillance isn't the thing that most crime is downstream from. So armed soldiers won't solve the problems that precipitate crime. I actually missed this story about parental anxiety in DC, but I learned about it while using today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a website and app that gathers related news articles from more than 50,000 sources around the world, all in one place so you can compare how different outlets cover the same story. Every story comes with a visual breakdown of political bias, factuality, and ownership, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. And if you go to ground.news/garrison or use the link in the video description or scan the QR code on the screen, you'll get 40% off of their Vantage plan. Let me tell you, so much of the political polarization in our time has everything to do with how and where you are getting your news. 2 people can find themselves looking at the same event, the same story, the same person, and come to totally different conclusions simply because they got their news from different sources. Take, for example, this story about the number of people arrested by the National Guard in DC. It's been covered by 40 sources with distribution between left-leaning and right-leaning sources, favoring the right quite a bit. You can also see the factuality and ownership information. For this story, 34% of the reporting outlets are owned by media conglomerates. You can even compare headlines to see how this bias can affect the framing. An interesting thing here is that across the political spectrum, you can see that the framing is actually pretty uniform for this story, which I found to be kind of rare as I use the Ground News app. One really cool feature is the blind spot feed, which covers stories underreported by either side of the political spectrum. Listen, I think Ground News is a very useful tool. They aren't trying to change your opinion about the news. They're simply trying to give you more information about where you may be getting your news from and help you see where you may have blind spots. So again, go to ground.news/garrison or use the link in the video description or the QR code on the screen to subscribe today. Remember, if you sign up through my link, you'll get 40% off of the Vantage plan, which is what I use to get unlimited access to all of their features and their tools. I hope you'll check them out. Thank you to Ground News for supporting this video. So we've talked about the causes and the consequences, but the question remains, what is the cure? And I sat down with Mayor Brandon Scott to discuss exactly that.
You know, Baltimore has been known as a relatively dangerous place for most of my life.
All of my life.
Okay.
I'm 41.
The Wire maybe didn't help with the kind of national image. The truth is, like, crime rates have been high in Baltimore. And I want to know why. Why is that? I want to know why were crime rates as high as they were in the 80s, 90s, and even in the 2000s.
In early 2000s. I think that you have to look at the reality, right? Many people will tell you that there's some simple causation and some simple solution to gun violence in Baltimore or any other place. There isn't, right? Folks have been looking for this immediate solution to something there is no immediate solution to. But when you think about Baltimore specifically, you have to throw a bunch of stuff in this pot, right? First and foremost, you're talking about the birthplace of racial redlining. The first racial redlining law was signed right in my office, right? You have to think about that and consider that now 90 years later, I am a mayor who is working to undo some of those policies that are still around today. They literally closed the library in my neighborhood and made us go miles further away. I didn't have an air-conditioned classroom until I was in ninth grade, right?
Wow.
I never swam at the pool at my childhood rec center, at Tawanda Rec Center, until I renovated it myself this summer because it was never open. Wow. It was always closed. There was something wrong with it. The water wasn't right. When you have all of that, and then you have these drugs and things show up, guns just randomly showing up in these neighborhoods, you're gonna get what we got.
This topic is back in the headlines because of an elected official, this time President Trump, who is offering a very bad answer to a very good question. How can we reduce crime is a good question, a question that people have been asking for a long time.
There are ways for the President of the United States to support Baltimore and cities around the country in continuing the historic reduction of gun violence that we're seeing in those cities. Bringing in National Guard is not that.
Mayor Scott and others present a better answer to that very good question. And I think we should take those answers and the results that they deliver very seriously. And for the record, I think it's important to point out that this isn't some idealistic, unserious solution that ignores crime. One of the many things that stood out to me in my interview with Mayor Scott was how clear he was that some people are threats to community safety and should be treated that way. He told me about the steps that his office takes when they are notified of a person who poses a threat to the community. It starts, he says, with a letter to that person.
Our group violence reduction strategy, where we identified those who are the most likely to be the victim or perpetrator of gun violence. We actually, with our community partners or More Voice partners, we go to them. They get a letter from me that says, I know who you are, I know what you do. I want you to stay alive. We'll help you with anything you need.
And Mayor Scott told me that lots of people have taken advantage of that off-ramp and turned their lives in a different direction.
One young man said, until we knocked on his door and told him he could do something different, he had been involved in the street since he was 12, right? No one told him he could be anything different.
But the reality is that some people don't. And Mayor Scott was pretty clear that this meant that those people may need to be removed from the community by law enforcement.
When people mess up, if you're out here robbing people and shooting people, we're gonna hold you accountable. But we also have to understand the difference and how we should do that for people based on where they are and based on how many times they've been in trouble.
But to be clear, Brandon Scott isn't the first to get this right. In fact, in this same August 1979 issue of Ebony magazine, the second to last essay, after all of the tough on crime rhetoric and the respectability politics and calls to pull oneself up by their bootstraps, after all of that is a poignant, thoughtful, measured article written by Congressman John Conyers. Though he was still relatively new to Congress in the 1970s, he would go on to be the longest serving Black congressman in US history. And his words in this magazine would prove to be prophetic. Change the environment, he urged. The main solution, he argued, in combating Black on Black crime, and any crime for that matter, is to address social marginality. Brilliantly, he takes aim at the foundational assumption in the label Black on Black crime. He challenges the racist assumption that Black people are unique in their predisposition toward criminality in the first place. He draws on available scholarship from his time that outlines the causal effects of economic inequality. And he concludes this way: the question of controlling crime in Black and white communities is less a question of reducing incidents, important as that is, than it is a question of changing the existing social and economic system in which crime is the inevitable byproduct of inequality and injustice. This is the only way to treat crime at its source. Fast forward nearly 30 years later, and Kamala Harris, then DA of San Francisco, was saying something similar.
It is a myth to say that African Americans don't want law enforcement. We do. We want our grandmothers to be able to walk to church and be safe. We want our babies to be able to walk to the park and be safe. What we don't want is racial profiling. What we don't want is excessive force. That's right. What we don't want is to have our civil liberties and civil rights be stripped, but we do want law enforcement. So if I, as law enforcement, with my responsibility to keep you safe, only talk about keeping you safe by sending people to prison for a long time, I'm necessarily gonna fall short because the vast majority of that crime's not even hitting my system. So if I'm gonna keep my promise to you to keep you safe, I better talk with you about what I'm doing in terms of crime prevention, which means recognizing that people coming out of the state prisons, 60% will recidivate if we don't get them in reentry programs, if we don't get them in job training, job readiness, get them in programs that deal with their substance abuse, get them in meaningful housing and employment so they don't recidivate.
My secret, sinister goal in all of this is to make an argument. I want you to think about all of this as you choose local leaders like mayors and police chiefs and county commissioners. My argument is that we've given this way of dealing with crime a valiant effort. We've tried policing the crime out of communities. We've tried sentencing the crime out of communities. We've even tried shaming the crime out of communities. And none of those efforts have really been effective because they don't address why poor communities are often hotspots for crime in the first place. My argument is that when you know better, you do better. And what's abundantly clear is now more than ever, we know better. Okay, I think I'm gonna call it there. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this video, I'd really appreciate it if you like this video and subscribe. It's right down there. It really does make a difference. So thank you so much for doing that. Of course, a huge shout out to James Forman Jr. for writing this really important book. I can't recommend it highly enough. I actually put a link to the book down in the description. So go check it out. It feels incredibly relevant to the moment that we are living through right now. So go pick this book up. Of course, a huge thanks to Mayor Brandon Scott and his team for making time for this interview. Let me know if you want to see the full conversation. We even talked about YNs at one point.
I really do want to talk about YNs, which YNs is short.
I know what it's short for.
So don't say it.
Don't say it.
Don't say it.
Don't give them the, I'll just say that our young brothers.
I like this.
If you're interested in that, I'll drop the full thing through my Substack newsletter. So make sure that you sign up for that as well so that you can be the first to know. There's a link down there. Again, like the video, subscribe, makes a huge difference. As always, I'm grateful that you're here, my friends. Until next time, peace.